My girlfriend and I just wanted to spend some quality time together. She's a nurse working the night shift, and her hospital requires at least 5 years of experience before she can even apply for a day shift. Meanwhile, I work a typical 9-to-5 marketing job. Our schedules are completely out of sync, making it difficult to find time for each other. Our sleep cycles are a mess, and when Valentine's Day fell on a day we were both scheduled to work, we felt frustrated. It was like we were being robbed of our time together, unable to truly enjoy our relationship. Determined not to let our mismatched schedules ruin everything, we planned a weekend getaway instead. Valentine's Day was on a Thursday, so we decided to take a trip that weekend. My girlfriend had always wanted to visit Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Her grandfather had worked there, and she found the history fascinating, especially the eerie aspects of it. She was always sharing little facts about how strange and secretive the place was. It was about an 8-hour drive from where we lived, so we struck a deal. I would drive the entire way there, and she would handle all the driving once we arrived. She definitely got the better end of the deal, but that's just what you do for someone you love. We arrived Friday night. She slept most of the way, but still felt exhausted. She assured me she'd be able to sleep that night and feel normal the next day. And honestly, Saturday was amazing. We explored museums, learned about the Manhattan Project, and even visited the plant where her grandfather had worked. The tour guide explained how the facility played a major role in the development of nuclear weapons. It was surreal. The day was packed, but as night fell, we ran out of energy and things to do. We decided to grab dinner at Wendy's. Don't judge us. She was driving as we made our way there, music playing in the background. I gazed out the window, lost in thought. At a red light, a blue Mustang pulled up beside us. I glanced over and saw an elderly man in the driver's seat. His skin was unnaturally pale, and he looked utterly miserable. I wouldn't have paid much attention if it weren't for the fact that he was staring right at me. The moment I locked eyes with him, he did something chilling. He smiled. But it wasn't a normal smile. It happened in an instant. A quick flicker from a deep frown to a grin and back again, like a glitch in reality. It sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to my girlfriend, but she was too busy jamming to Bohemian Rhapsody to notice. The light changed and we drove off. I kept my eyes on that car until it finally turned away. Sunday night, we decided to eat at a proper restaurant instead of fast food. We found a well-reviewed local spot on Google, and I was excited to have my favorite meal, deep-fried chicken. By then, I had completely forgotten about the eerie old man. But halfway through my meal, I noticed him again. He was in the restaurant. He was staring at me. And just like before, the moment I noticed him, he did that strange facial movement, miserable frown, split-second smile, then back to the frown. A cold wave of unease washed over me. My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was overreacting, but something about him made me feel watched, hunted. Without thinking, I stood up and approached him. He was sitting alone in a booth. I demanded to know why he was staring at me like that. He didn't respond. He just sat there, frowning. My girlfriend grabbed my arm, urging me to leave. "It's not illegal to look at people," she reminded me. I reluctantly backed off, but the feeling of dread lingered. Monday morning, we began the long drive home. An hour in, my girlfriend was asleep beside me. The road stretched ahead, empty and quiet. That's when I saw him again. This time, he was driving a completely different car. A chill ran down my spine. He was in the left lane, as if about to pass me, but instead, he kept pace with my car for nearly a mile. My pulse raced. I turned my head to give him an annoyed glance, and then I saw his face. The miserable expression was gone. He was grinning. That same flickering smile from before now stretched permanently across his face. It was grotesque, unnatural. My breath hitched in my throat. Then, without warning, he jerked his car toward mine. I slammed the brakes and swerved off the road, barely avoiding a collision. My girlfriend jolted awake, screaming as the car skidded onto the shoulder. Through a cloud of dust, I saw his vehicle speeding away into the distance. We sat there, stunned. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. My girlfriend frantically asked what had happened, but I could barely find the words. We debated calling the police, but I was too terrified to stay in that town any longer. The best course of action was to get as far away as possible. The rest of the ride home was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. That weekend was supposed to be a romantic getaway, but instead, it became a nightmare I will never forget. I won't lie, I've always been a strange guy, a loner. People have irritated me for as long as I can remember, which is why it's ironic that the scariest experience of my life is tied to Valentine's Day. After high school, I didn't bother with college. I was broke and had no clue what I wanted to do. My plan was simple: lay low, work, and save up a little money. I ended up at a rundown gas station, the kind that even truckers found repulsive. I remember one stopping in once, watching me scroll through my phone at the register. He gave me a disgusted look and muttered something about taking responsibility for how bad the place looked. I didn't have the energy to explain I wasn't the owner. I just rang him up and let him leave in silence. A couple of years back, on Valentine's Day, I volunteered for the night shift. It paid a little extra, and it was usually dead quiet. I spent most of my time browsing memes on Reddit, but that night felt different. I had this gnawing sense of unease, an ominous feeling I couldn't shake. I wasn't the type to believe in the supernatural, but something in my gut told me something was off. That feeling only grew stronger after midnight. I was trying to ignore it when he walked in. It must have been around 1:15 a.m. The moment I saw him, I knew something was wrong. His face was deeply lined, his skin aged beyond his years. But it was his eyes, cold, unsettling. If you looked into them long enough, you'd start questioning his sanity. He moved quickly with purpose, as if he had memorized every aisle. He never hesitated, never stopped to think. He came to the register, dropping his items onto the counter. A small gardening shovel, duct tape, and a rope. My stomach twisted. Every horror movie I'd ever seen came rushing to mind. Was I staring at a serial killer? For a moment, I was frozen in my own thoughts. Then I snapped out of it and asked if he needed anything else. He didn't respond. Instead, he pointed at the cigarettes behind me. I placed a pack of Marlboro Lights on the counter. He lifted 2 fingers. I grabbed another pack. As I rang him up, I noticed his breathing quicken. He was getting impatient, irritated, trying to break the tension. I forced a chuckle. "Got a gardening date tonight, do you?" He didn't react, didn't even blink. He just stared at me before giving a single, slow nod. The total was $34. He slammed 2 20s onto the counter, grabbed his items without waiting for change, and darted out. Something about the way he left unsettled me. Curiosity got the best of me, and I stepped outside to watch him go. I knew I wasn't supposed to, but I couldn't help it. Who was he? What was he planning? Was I actually staring at a killer? That's when he slammed on the brakes. I felt my blood turn to ice as his truck whipped around and sped back toward the gas station. Panic set in. I bolted inside, slammed the door shut, locked it, and flipped the closed sign. My hands trembled as I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. "He's coming back." I gasped into the receiver, rattling off the address before dropping the phone onto the counter. The truck screeched to a stop outside. My heart pounded against my ribs. Then bang. He started pounding on the door, trying to get in. I had nothing to defend myself with except the same kind of shovel he'd just bought. I dashed across the store, grabbed one from the shelf, and braced myself. "The police are on their way," I shouted, my voice shaking. I didn't believe it myself, but I hoped he would. Then, suddenly, he stopped. The silence was worse than the banging. I was sure he was going to ram his truck straight through the building. Instead, I heard glass shatter. I turned just in time to see a lit match hit the floor. Fire, I scrambled for the fire extinguisher, spraying wildly until the flames died down. By the time I looked up, he was gone, his truck vanishing into the night. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. One of the officers tried cracking a joke about the failed arson attempt, but I barely registered it. I was still too shaken, too numb. I explained everything from start to finish, but they had no answers. To this day, I don't know why he came back. Maybe he realized I could identify him. Maybe he was just a lunatic who didn't like being watched. But what haunts me the most, the thing that still keeps me awake at night, is the thought of those items he bought. The shovel, the rope, the duct tape. Somewhere out there, I'm almost certain, someone didn't get a happy ending that Valentine's Day. This is probably the most terrifying experience of my life. One that left me shaken, traumatized, and made dating feel impossible ever since. To give you some context, I'm a 23-year-old woman living in a small rural town in Mississippi. In a place like this, everybody knows everybody. I've always felt like an outsider. Not that I hated it here, but I never truly clicked with anyone. Despite having friends, loneliness was a constant companion. A couple of years ago, I decided to try online dating and match with a guy on Tinder from a few towns over. He wasn't the most attractive, but that never mattered to me. What I cared about was kindness and compatibility. Our first few dates were fine. He was respectful, never pushed boundaries, and seemed like a decent guy. After a few weeks of casual outings, we decided to make it official. Together, we deleted our Tinder accounts and started spending more time with each other. I really believed we had a shot at something meaningful. But as the days passed, I noticed things that didn't sit right. At first, it was small, odd behaviors, strange reactions. Then, I saw the cracks. He had intense mood swings, moments of extreme anxiety and depression, and a disturbing lack of control over his emotions. One night, his parents asked him to sleep on the couch so his uncle could take his bed. Instead of shrugging it off, he had a full-blown breakdown. I remember texting him as he spiraled, asking me if he should physically attack his uncle or start a fight. That was the moment I knew this relationship had to end. A few more outbursts later, I made my decision. I invited him for coffee, and we sat down for the talk. Surprisingly, he took it better than I expected. He looked sad, sure, but didn't lash out. No yelling, no threats, just a defeated sigh before he turned and walked away. I felt guilty, but also relieved. It was over, at least. I thought it was. Months passed. Life went on. By the time February rolled around, I had almost forgotten about him. Then came Valentine's Day. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, my stomach clenched. A car was parked there, one I didn't recognize at first. But when I got closer, my blood ran cold. It was his. I froze. How did he even know where I lived? He had never been to my house, never once followed me home. There was no reason, no way, for him to be here. My heart pounded as I reached into my bag, my fingers wrapping around the cold metal of my pistol. Out here in rural Mississippi, unexpected visitors don't just happen. He stepped out of his car, clutching a bouquet of flowers. For a second, I just stared. Was this real? His face was off, gaunt, hollow, eyes sunken in like he hadn't slept in days. His posture was stiff, uneasy, like he was battling something inside his head. I forced my voice steady. "What are you doing here?" For a moment, he didn't respond. Just stood there, eyes locked on mine, the silence stretching between us. Then, finally, he spoke. "Will you be my Valentine?" The second the words left his lips, I knew. He was drunk, and something was very, very wrong. A chill crawled up my spine. I had heard too many horror stories. Stories that started exactly like this. I didn't hesitate. I pulled out my gun and aimed it directly at him. "No, Get away from my house. Now. His eyes widened, genuinely startled. For a brief second, I thought he might argue, plead, do something. But instead, he turned, scurried back to his car, and sped off into the night. My hands were shaking, but I kept the gun raised, waiting, just in case he came back. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something. Something metal, glinting in the dirt. He must have dropped it when he ran. Slowly, cautiously, I approached. The darkness made it hard to tell, so I picked it up, bringing it under the glow of my phone's flashlight. And that's when I saw it. A pair of metal handcuffs. I felt sick. This man, this boyfriend I once trusted, had been thinking about me for months, waiting, planning, and he came here prepared. To do what exactly? I don't even want to know. I called the police immediately. They took my report, but since he hadn't technically committed a crime, there was little they could do. That didn't stop me from warning my family, my friends, anyone who might cross paths with him. Even now, I can't help but think about how different that night could have been. What if I hadn't been armed? What if I had opened my door, let my guard down? What if my parents weren't gone for just a few hours but the whole night? Would I have vanished? Would I be another face on a missing persons poster? Another name whispered on true crime podcasts? I don't know, and I never want to find out. So please, if you're reading this, take this as a lesson. If you live alone, if you're isolated, if you're vulnerable, make sure you can protect yourself. Because I have a feeling I wasn't the first girl he tried this on, and I won't be the last. A couple of years ago, my husband and I decided we were tired of the pressures surrounding Valentine's Day. The cards, the flowers, the last-minute dinner reservations. Instead, we came up with a different plan. Rather than cramming all the romance into a single day, we'd spread it out over a week. This way, we could enjoy the time together without the stress of planning everything perfectly. Since we live in the UK, we figured it wouldn't be too difficult to escape to Lake Geneva for a week. We envisioned a cozy, remote cabin with a small restaurant nearby, a perfect place to relax. My husband had spent part of his childhood in the area, so it also gave him a chance to reconnect with some old friends and family. It seemed like the ideal getaway. After booking time off work, we scoured the internet and found what looked like the perfect spot. A semi-resort made up of private cabins spread across a scenic landscape. Each cabin was secluded, connected only by small gravel paths that led to a central lodge housing a restaurant run by a well-known chef, a spa, and a reception area. Though technically a resort, it had a quiet, intimate feel, which was exactly what we were looking for. It was a bit pricey, but we justified the cost as a way of combining a holiday with an indulgent Valentine's dinner. In a way, we thought we were saving money. Upon arrival, we were greeted by an incredibly polite staff who knew our names immediately from our booking. They whisked away our luggage and handed us complimentary cocktails while we sat in front of a vast glass window overlooking the lake. The view was breathtaking, calm, serene, and best of all, quiet. It was a welcome escape from city life, where we wouldn't have to fight for cabs or squeeze onto crowded buses after a few too many glasses of wine. As we were finishing our drinks, a man approached us and introduced himself as Luca. He had one of those European accents that was hard to place. His English was almost perfect, but with slight quirks that made it clear he wasn't a native speaker. He was tall, athletic, dressed in crisp white tennis clothes. Friendly enough, he struck up a conversation, asking where we were from. When we said the UK, he smiled and mentioned something that stuck with me. He said I looked just like his wife and that we simply had to meet her. The comment lingered in my mind, and for the next few days, I found myself casually glancing around, curious to spot my supposed doppelganger. We assured him we'd likely run into him and his wife at the restaurant or spa, and parted ways. Though something about Lucas seemed a little off, his eye contact too intense, his voice a little too loud, I dismissed it as a cultural difference. Unfortunately, February isn't the best time to visit a Swiss resort. The weather was unpredictable, and rain often kept us indoors. That wasn't a problem for us, though. We were a married couple spending Valentine's week together. Finding things to do indoors wasn't difficult. Luca's cabin must have been near ours because we saw him often, passing by during breakfast, lunch, and on our way to the spa. The more I interacted with him, the more I disliked him. It wasn't just a cultural quirk. He was genuinely arrogant, constantly steering conversations back to himself, humble bragging about his plans and achievements. It became irritating. This was supposed to be our time together, and his constant interruptions were starting to ruin it for me. My husband snores loudly. Over time, I developed a habit of moving to the sofa in the middle of the night when his snoring became unbearable. The second night of our stay, I did just that. The cabin had a large glass panel facing the lake, and as I settled onto the couch, I turned on a lamp to navigate the unfamiliar space. The view outside was stunning even at night. Lights flickered across the water, and the dark silhouettes of trees swayed in the wind. Then I saw it, a shape shoulders ahead, standing motionless down the path that led into the resort. It wasn't moving, just watching. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that while I could only make out a vague figure, they had a perfect view of me through the illuminated cabin window. My pulse quickened. I tried to stay calm, calling my husband's name softly at first, then louder as fear crept into my voice. The figure remained still. It was about 100 feet away. Too far to see any features, but close enough to feel menacing. By the time my husband came into the room, the figure had vanished. He tried to reassure me, saying it could have been a security guard or a staff member making rounds. Still, I slept in our bedroom for the rest of the trip. The next morning, Luca appeared again at breakfast, as if nothing had happened. A growing unease settled over me. I began to suspect it had been him outside our cabin that night. He spoke about his wife often, but I had yet to see her. His gaze made my skin crawl, as if he thought that since I resembled her, I somehow belonged to him. Valentine's Day arrived, and we enjoyed a slow morning, planning a game of tennis in the afternoon. Luca mentioned that his wife had gone ahead to secure a court, then casually informed us they were all booked. Disappointed, but not devastated, we opted instead for Bloody Marys and a relaxing day. That night, we got drunk. The resort's 2-for-1 Valentines cocktails were too tempting to resist. We laughed, chatted with other couples, and watched the rain on the lake. For once, Luca was nowhere in sight. We stumbled back to our cabin, sharing an umbrella, then fell into bed. My husband quickly drifted off, but I stayed awake, sipping water to stave off the inevitable hangover. As I turned off the tap, I heard it, a faint knocking sound, rhythmic, triplets, dum-dum-dum. I held my breath and listened. The same sound again, only louder. My blood ran cold as realization hit. Someone was trying the window latch, testing to see if it was locked. I moved as quietly as possible across the room, trying to wake my husband without making noise. As I reached him, I heard footsteps shifting around the cabin. Then the sound moved to the door, this time more forceful. Someone was trying to handle, pushing, pulling. I shook my husband violently, whispering urgently. He groggily woke up as the sounds outside grew more aggressive. Finally, he turned on every light in the cabin, grabbed a broom, and marched to the front door. Nothing. No one. Resort security responded quickly. The manager himself arrived, apologizing profusely. Though they found no evidence of an intruder, they offered us reassurances, a security detail for the night, even a discounted future stay. But when I mentioned Luca, their reaction stunned me. Luca's cabin wasn't near ours. In fact, it wasn't even in the couple's section of the resort. He had booked a solo retreat on the other side of the property. More disturbingly, the receptionist informed me that Luca had checked out at lunch on Valentine's Day. He had been alone the entire time. There was no wife. We never went back. This happened about a year ago, right around Valentine's Day. I remember because I had spent the week leading up to it feeling miserable, stalking my ex on Instagram, drowning in self-pity. We had broken up a few months earlier, and since she was the one who found our flat, she kept it. I moved out. Simple but painful. I ended up in a small flat on the outskirts of London, far from anything central. If you've ever tried renting in London, you'd know, unless you're willing to pay a fortune, you're looking at a box with a toilet. So, as Valentine's Day approached, I found myself alone, working my way through a bottle of Prosecco I should have been sharing with someone. That's when I had an idea. I opened my dating apps and set the radius to as small as possible. No more matches from the other side of London that would never lead to a real date. Maybe, just maybe, I could find someone for Valentine's. That's when I matched with Becca. She seemed nice, funny, down to earth, and most importantly, she lived close by. Definitely in my league, which was a rare find. We set up a date for the night before Valentine's. Just drinks, nothing too serious. It felt like a good distraction, like I was finally moving on. The evening arrived. I had a beer or two for liquid courage, then messaged Becca as I left for the pub, The Crown. She replied quickly, cool, almost there. It was drizzling, the air cold and damp, but I didn't mind. The walk wasn't long, though it took me through a maze of back streets. I avoided the alleyways. Muggings weren't uncommon in this part of town. When I finally arrived, I texted her to say I was running a little late. She replied almost instantly, shoot, didn't get a chance to message you. There's a big group in there for a birthday, really loud and rowdy. I felt uncomfortable, so I walked to a restaurant nearby. They might have space for us, but hurry. I glanced inside. She wasn't wrong. A group of guys were being obnoxiously loud, and outside, another bunch was smoking and jeering. If I were a woman waiting alone, I wouldn't have wanted to stick around either. She sent the restaurant's name, urging me to come quickly. I typed the restaurant into Google Maps. There were two routes, one quick, cutting through an old semi-abandoned estate, and another that took 10 minutes longer but stuck to well-lit streets. The estate was a no-go for me. I'd seen it before, rows of boarded-up buildings, barely any streetlights. The kind of place where shadows played tricks on your mind. I texted her back, saying I'd take the long route and be a little late. Again, her reply was instant. No, just take the shortcut. It's fine. I literally just walked through it. Her urgency unsettled me. The texts were coming too fast, like she was watching me. I responded, no chance. I'm not walking through that place at night. Silence. The unease in my stomach twisted tighter. I suddenly became very aware of how empty the streets were. No pedestrians. No traffic. Just me, under the dim glow of streetlights. I picked up my pace. My phone buzzed again. Just hurry up. The shortcut is fine. Why was she pushing this so hard? My gut screamed at me that something was wrong. The hairs on my neck stood up. I moved to the middle of the road, feeling safer in the open. Every darkened doorway, every alley I passed felt like a hiding place for something or someone. I avoided looking into shop windows and car reflections, knowing I'd only spook myself further. At this point, I wasn't even thinking about the date anymore. I just wanted to reach a safe, well-lit place with people around. Then, suddenly, her messages stopped. One moment, she was desperately urging me to hurry. The next, nothing. I reached the restaurant and stepped inside. It wasn't crowded. In fact, it was nearly empty. A couple of families, an older couple. That was it. I asked the waiter if a woman matching Becca's description had come in, maybe asked about a table. He frowned. No, not tonight. That sinking feeling in my stomach turned to ice. I pulled out my phone, stared at the messages. My mind raced. Someone had been pretending to be Becca. But why? The thought that unsettled me the most wasn't just that they had tricked me into coming here. It was that they had been talking to me for days, pretending to be normal. That meant this wasn't random. It was planned. I glanced outside. Whoever was knew I was here. They knew I hadn't taken the shortcut. Were they still watching? The idea of my silhouette framed against the restaurant's window made my skin crawl. My stomach churned as I realized, if they had lured me through the estate, what would have happened? I stayed in the restaurant, ordered an Uber, and texted a few friends just in case. Even in the car, I felt exposed, trying to stay away from the window. My mind wouldn't stop racing. They didn't know my exact address, but they knew my area. That was enough. That night, as I lay in bed, I opened my rental app and started looking for flats on the other side of the city. As soon as I could, I was moving. Thank you so much for watching video.